So yeah, Matt, a week ago I let you borrow these two comics.
Yes, you did.
Superman number 423 and Action Comics number 583, and I also had this version, and so it's one of my favorite comics. Since you'd never read it before, I was curious your take on it, and just to sort of talk about it. It's one of my favorite comics, and it's Alan Moore, like in the mid '80s, they were gonna completely like restart and reboot and revamp the whole DC universe. And, it's one of those things that now like Marvel and DC do it like every week, but back then it was like a big deal. And so you had the entire history of Superman from like the 30s to the 80s, and they were just going to kind of sweep that aside and start a new fresh thing to kind of give people like a fresh starting point for it and stuff. And it was tied into like Crisis on Infinite Earths, which this huge multiversal kind of thing, big explosive finale and stuff. And so they were gonna start the new one, and John Byrne was gonna be the guy to do it. He was gonna write and draw it. A lot of people were vying for that position to be the person to like reintroduce Superman to the world. Frank Miller and Steve Gerber were two people who were trying to working on a pitch for it, but ultimately John Byrne won out, and Alan Moore was doing Watchmen and all his kind of work, Swamp Thing and stuff at DC, and when he heard that they were going to be ending Superman as we know it and like restarting it as if Superman's arriving on Earth for the first time now in like 1986 or whatever, he found Julie Schwartz, the editor of the Superman line, and I think he actually like put his hand around his throat or mimed it maybe, or threatened to but he said, if you let anybody but me write the final story, I will murder you. And so then he got and of course like he was joking, but it's like, and I'm so glad Julie Schwartz gave him the job, because it is like this is extremely rare in comics, in superhero comics. In superhero comics, they just kind of run on forever, and they either get like abruptly canceled with no resolution or like a rushed conclusion, or they just kind of get like this continual tease or whatever. Yeah. It's just sort of like just the way the industry has kind of shaped itself, and like the Legend of Superman, and like Alan Moore is kind of the person I learned this from, that like every legend deserves an ending. Like even though legends and mythology are cyclical and are retold by every generation, it really loses something if you don't have some kind of ending. So he crafted an ending for like the entire Superman story up to that point, and crafts it in a way that really like plays by the rules. Like it really like reads like the sort of Superman stories that they've been doing all along. It's got elements of like the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, and even like the 70s and 80s. He's sort of create. But I thought it would be something you'd be into too, because it's like, dude, we need closure. We need closure on the Superman story. Like we have closure on the Batman story because Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns kind of gave us like the closure on Batman, and then we even got like closure on Batman in sort of the Christian Bale. So we have a lot of like acceptable endings for the Legend of Batman, but like this is what we've got. We haven't really gotten it in any other form,
Tom, this is one of my favorite comics of all time.
Really? Okay, yeah, it's one of mine,
Like, I'm obsessed with it now. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it, love it, love it. There was just, I'm going to keep, there's so many details in there I want to, like, keep pouring over.
Yeah, I mean, I own it in multiple forms. Like, this was the first way I read it. It's this sort of collection of both of them. And then it has, like, an essay in the beginning that kind of gives you the historical context.
That sounds cool.
But then, I had to get it in the original, like, newsprint version.
I got to score those.
With, like, the real pulpy colors and stuff. But, yeah, like, because, again, this is like a comic I read for the first time a long time ago. And made a huge impression on me, but like I'm curious what your impression is.
Super interesting. Like Lois is doing that interview.
Yeah,
So
yeah, great
she's-
framing.
Great
sequence.
framing way to frame it. So it's pretty cool getting told in that sense. And also, I wasn't really familiar with all the characters,
Okay.
like the villain, the Rogues Gallery. So seeing them like pop in from the periphery kind of,
Yeah.
and like inject themselves. That I thought that was cool, and like because he had the it's a Brainiac.
Brainiac, yeah.
I can't get enough. Like, why was Brainiac's head out in the Arctic? That was
Yeah.
cool as fuck. And then Luther, like, oh god, it melds with his brain, and
Yeah.
he puts it on like a helmet and controlling it. I was like, that's fucking sick. So yeah, why was he out in the?
Well, yeah, like a lot of the stuff in here, like some of the references I had context for when I read it, and then some of them I didn't. But again, it's fine.
It's
like he kind of
perfect,
introduces you. But like, so this cover, this is like a classic. Like this is a sort of radical reinvention of Superman, like a way of giving the entire Superman story closure, a sort of like the last days of Camelot kind of thing. But he really is playing by the rules. Like this is a classic Superman type of cover where you'd have like all the crazy stuff you're going to see in the issue.
Yeah.
And most of the time in a Superman comic, all this stuff they're promising on the cover is extremely disappointing when you actually read it. When you get to it's like and so the killing of Clark Kent and stuff, like Clark Kent doesn't die, but you would get promised these kind of things. You get see the rampage of Bizarro, and this pays off.
We get
really
to
nicely.
see it.
The
His-
return of the fearsome funsters, the killing of Clark Kent, the new Brainiac Luthor team. What you're talking about with Brainiac and Luthor, it is like sort of a classic Superman thing. The Brainiac Luthor team, it happened like in the 50s or the 60s, and then it happened a number of times where they like team up. But then this time the dynamic is very different, and it's like a more sinister
Very
dynamic.
sinister. And then with Bizarro, his dialogue was very like interesting and fun. Like,
How much do you know of like the super? Because for me, it's like there was a book called Superman from the 30s to the 70s that like was in the library at my school, and so when it was like library time at school and you could pick out a book, I would keep repeatedly taking that one out, and so it gave me this like cross section of like all these Superman stories from like the 30s to the 70s. That's where a lot of my Superman knowledge came from. So like Bizarro and like a lot of these characters were sort of from that was like the seminal text, and maybe we'll do an episode about that.
oh, that'd be cool. I'd love to do that.
But that was like my seminal Superman text. So I was pretty versed in this stuff, and then also like the Christopher Reeve movies, the TV show from the 50s, and things like. So that was my Superman, and then the Superpowers toys, the Super Friends cartoon, like the Superman cartoons. So I sort of cobbled it together. Again, there's like a lot of stuff in here that I wasn't familiar with. I wasn't familiar with Pete Ross, like I am now. Like I've read some like old Superboy comics and stuff like Pete Ross, but like I wasn't. But it's like, oh, you get it pretty quick that there's a guy who knows Superman's secret identity, and his name's Pete Ross, and they kill him and stuff, and some of these characters like the Metallo. I didn't know Metallo. So I didn't. But again, it's kind of
it's okay. Like
it's okay. Yeah,
like
you get enough of an introduction.
I love because like I'd hear about these characters.
Yeah.
Randomly, like I first heard of Bizarro in like 6th grade or 5th grade. My teacher, for some reason, was explaining.
Oh, okay.
Super was.
How off-putting to get introduced to Bizarro, because like I knew Bizarro from like the like Super Friends cartoon, and then I think I had like that 30s to the 70s book, he's in there, and then I had like a Superman Choose Your Own Adventure that like
awesome.
Brainiac's in and stuff. So like all these little things. That's where I was definitely primed for this. When I finally read this, I'm like,
I didn't know about
finally this story pays off.
Like I heard of Mixel. Like I'm not really familiar with
he's
Superman.
He's like Super Friends and stuff. And like this Brainiac, that was like a toy. Like that was the Superpowers toy. Because Brainiac, like up until the 80s, Brainiac was just this kind of like green bald guy, from another planet, and then robot from another planet. But then like in the 80s, they redesigned him into this like super cool like Terminator exoskeleton kind of thing, and then made the toy of him. And so that was like, to me, it was like, what, I was like just the right age to get my mind blown by that. So Like that's when I think of Brainiac, that's who I think of.
I love his look.
But yeah, like I don't know, like I haven't read enough like of like the Superman comics leading up to this, but I'm assuming, you know, that there wasn't like some, you know, that you know, Alan Moore's doing a little bit of retro continuity, saying that like, oh, you know, Superman, you know, destroyed Brainiac, but they haven't found all the parts, and then Luthor's like, but maybe there is like a story that somebody did in like 1984 or something that you know had it's referencing, because he does seem to like he does do a good job of incorporating elements that are like, again, like the classic stuff he grew up with that he was into, but also like more recent developments. But that sequence of Luthor in you know, in the Arctic with his, you know, his thick coat and stuff, finding Brainiac,
it's so awesome.
It made me think of like Gene Hackman, because like so much of what Gene Hackman is doing in like Superman 2 is that kind of stuff where he's like in the Arctic, he's got his parka on, you know.
Spot on, Tom. Like I had to double check the date on this because I was like, this is definitely post movie, like movie. So I'm like, well, I can hear his dialogue.
Yeah, because Alan Moore is doing a lot of like really intelligent things, and he's smart enough to like kind of like grab stuff like little touchstones that people would be familiar with. And then this introduction where he says, this is an imaginary story, blah 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 blah, and then he says, this is an imaginary story, aren't they all?
I love that,
because that was a tradition in DC comics, in like Superman comics, is they would have these imaginary stories. It would be these comics where it's like they tell you right up front, this is an imaginary story, and so you'll maybe see Superman die, or you'll see Superman get married or something, but it's an imaginary story. Like we're just playing what if. Don't get your head all in a bunch. But then he has that proviso of like, this is an imaginary story, but aren't they all? It's like, yes, a Superman comic. This is an imaginary Superman comic, but Superman comics are imaginary to begin with. So how is this any more imaginary? So he kind of sets it up really nicely as this can be the definitive ending for Superman, and that's how I read it. I mean, no one's done a better attempt at it than this, but also kind of like, or you could just blow it off, you know,
whatever
whichever, you know. He does that in like in that Twilight of the Superheroes. He kind of does a similar thing where it's like, okay, you can read this as the finale for the superheroes, or maybe it never happens, you know.
Tom, I'm obsessed now with this, and I'm gonna track like I gotta get the.
It's been reprinted a number of times. Like it's also been reprinted as part of like, you know, Alan Moore's DC Comics.
Ooh,
you know, it's been in like sort of larger things.
The set pieces deliver in this, like the Bizarro's rampage, like, and then you know,
and Bizarro talks in like opposites, and like as a kid, that would always fascinate me because he'd say, you know, so instead of saying goodbye, he says hello, and so then his death scene, he's like, hello, Superman, hello, and it's like kind of, you know,
I was choking up a little.
There's a lot of scenes like you can tell Alan Moore's been walking around with this stuff in his back pocket, just waiting, and then he gets to like employ every one of those things. And yet, what a travesty it would have been if they didn't let him do this, because these superhero universes have been rebooted a number of times, and they haven't really done this. You know, like they you know, it's like it's the perfect excuse to like go, you know, and like blow the whole thing up and tell like a super cool story. But it just, I don't, for whatever reason, they don't let it happen. Like this is a very rare occurrence. Like even with like Transformers, like IDW was losing the Transformers license, and so there was this big plan, and I was, you know, part of the planning for this like big like let's blow up the Transformers universe, and then it was like it was nixed by Hasbro, and like I get it, they're kind of like, well, we don't want to have some grand finale that's going to upstage this new phase, but it's like, come on, let's have some fun. Like, are you are you just going to tickle our ass with a feather for like the rest of our, like, am I going to die without there being, you know what I mean? Like, and if Alan Moore hadn't done this, we could have possibly gone to our graves without getting any closure on the Superman mythology. This thing, you know, this story we've been told, you know, from
that's
infancy.
horseshit. They did
Because Action and Superman were two different comics that featured Superman, and they kind of had slightly different continuities. I think there was a point where they had completely different continuities, and then they kind of merged them, but then kind of had like, so like in Superman, or like in one of the, I think in Superman, he's like a TV anchor, and then in action he's a news reporter, and and they kind of like merged it at a certain point where it's like, oh yeah, he works at the newspaper, but then he also at night, is like the news anchor,
That, because like when I was reading it, my brain was, I was like, I don't remember Clark being behind the camera.
Yeah, that was like a development they did in the 70s.
Okay.
I mean, this does play by the rules of Superman comics, but you're not going to find a Superman comic that's as good as it. Like, so many, like I love Superman and I love Superman comics, and so many of my favorite Superman comics are imaginary stories. There's like a great one from the 60s, The Death of Superman, that's like amazing. But like most of them are utter shit, are like not worth your time, But yeah, if you read some of the ones from the 70s, you'll see his sort of, and it's a little harder for him to keep his secret identity when he has to like show up behind the news desk at a certain time every day.
There it is.
Yeah, his costume gets ripped to shreds. And yeah, it's these little toy Superman dolls. And they're like, Lana Lang is like, hey, I've seen these. And look, when you squeeze their legs together, and like when I was the Superman action figure from the Superpowers line that I still have, when you squeeze his legs, he does this. He does this when he squeezes his legs. So she's like squeezing his legs, expecting him to do this, but instead he like shoots a laser out of his eye and like starts killing and killing Clark Kent.
Look at this. This reminds me from the Superman 3 with that.
Yeah, because Superman 3, I think initially they were going to use Brainiac, but then they ended up like inventing like a new kind of computer instead. There's this thing in here I think is like, I'm thinking it's like a dig, and maybe it's from Alan Moore, or maybe it's a dig that Curt Swan, the artist, is doing. But there's this sex worker that's talking to this guy, and she's saying, "Hey, honey, you look kind of hot and bothered. Could you use a date?" She's sort of coming on to him. And this looks exactly like Mary Jane from Spider-Man. So I'm wondering if this is like a little dig at Marvel. It's like Mary Jane is a sex worker in the DC universe.
Oh, this is one.
The Siege.
Look at this panel. Wow.
Yeah, the Siege. Yeah, really great. The Metallos have a siege on Daily Planet building, and this is kind of like a generational thing too, because the Metallos. I didn't know who the Metallos were. That was like super obscure to me, but it's like, if you grew up with like the Justice League cartoon or the Superman the animated series, then these guys are like second. Like Metallo is like an established guy in there, but it's really cool. And this, she talks about how when Superman, Lois Lane is falling, and again, it's like the scene in Superman the movie, but she's falling, and then Superman rescues her, and she talks about how she's been through this a number of times to the point where it almost seems like a recurring dream. And that she would see this streak of violet, because the red and blue in his costume would like blend together because he's moving so fast. Really beautiful little detail. Literal purple prose. Alan Moore's known for his purple prose, but literally, violet. His purple prose. But yeah, really beautiful. And then the way Superman dispatches with these guys is by like rubbing the Daily Planet symbol super fast and magnetizing it, and then it attracts all the things. And that's that would happen so much in Superman comics, where he'd like rub something real fast, and again it feels like a masturbation metaphor, And but again, it's comics. It's like kind of a quick way to solve this problem. But I'm thinking if they made a movie of this. The way, like, if Zack Snyder or somebody was directing it, the way they get through this is like, the Daily Planet's been taken over by these Metallos. They'd have this like slow motion fight where like Superman is like running or flying through the Daily Planet and taking out each one of those guys like one at a time at super speed, in slow motion,
He's like rubbing the thing in slow motion. He's like, he's got his arms around it, and he's like jerking it.
I'd like to. This might be an interesting project to kind of figure out the first time Superman did that, where he like rubs his hand together real fast to make like a static electricity effect. Because it might be Jack Kirby, because he does that in like one of his Jimmy Olsen issues. So like, I wonder if somebody did that before. Like, because I wouldn't be shocked if like Jack Kirby, was like the guy who got there first, kind of innovated something. So yeah, just this great story, and then they kind of like retreat back to the Fortress of Solitude, and yeah, like, you know, I had sort of a, you know, I had sort of a passing understanding of like the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and one of the big moments in there is the death of Supergirl. So when Supergirl comes back, you know, Superman's kind of upset, and then and Superman can't lie. Supergirl is like, oh, how am I able to be here? Because I thought, you know, two people couldn't, because she comes back in time, you know, from the future with the Legion of Superheroes, and she's like, I thought, you know, I couldn't exist at two places in the same time. What's going on? And then Superman says, right now, Supergirl is in the past. So he's kind of like telling the truth, but, you know, like, you know, it's like a way to like, not tell her that, oh, you're dead in this time stream, but like, but also not you know, tell a lie.
This is one of my favorite comics.
Mm-hmm.
I'm obsessed now. And like this one,
The ending, yeah, because again,
wow.
like this is so rare. Like these superhero stories don't get an ending. They never get an ending, and you're just kind of like jerked around for your entire life, and like it's like, give us an ending, give it, you know. And the few times that somebody has done an ending, even if it is like, oh, some alternate future or whatever, it does the job, and it kind of like, you know, it sticks in your head, you know, it kind of. So like there's Dark Knight Returns, there's Days of Future Past, which like tells like the story of the last days of the X-Men. And again, like they've since, you know, shown other alternate futures and done this and that, but like the Days of Future Past, like for me at least, kind of sticks. You know, it kind of like it's credible. Like I believe it in a way that like these other you know, other ones have. And it's like, you know, let's give these characters some closure.
I've been thinking about this a lot.
Yeah.
Like when they put the shield over.
Yes.
I was gonna say you get a little Batman.
Yeah.
Like
I like when they have these. Yeah, and then there's this like Superwoman who shows up. This like, and you know, I was seeing this. I was like, who is that? But I was very like interested in that whole costume,
cool.
the colors, and then like I went and sort of, you know, read about this character. I think she's like Jimmy Olsen's great-great-granddaughter from the future who becomes
awesome.
Superwoman and stuff. But again, and then there's this guy. Do you know who this guy is? That's Vartox. And they created him after the movie Zardoz came out. So they were like, let's put Sean Connery's character from Zardoz into Superman.
Wait, now I think Vartox is one of my top 5 favorite characters. Because it looks just like Zardoz there.
Yeah, this last like siege of the Fortress of Solitude is so much fun. And it's like, man, you know, like Alan Moore was like thinking about like role-playing games and stuff like that. And he did like a role-playing game module for like the Watchmen and stuff like that. And it's like, this would make a great, you know, role-playing game with like miniatures. Maybe we could even do like a HeroScape campaign where it's like Brainiac and, you know, the Legion of Evil superheroes versus the Fortress of Solitude. You know,
Tom, I'm gonna try to score some miniatures.
Yeah.
And then we can incorporate them into the game. Like I love. We were talking about on that last page, like Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
Like the big scale,
scope,
and then
yeah.
you can see them like really
real
tiny
and
in
this
there.
great like Brainiac spaceship. I mean, this was like when I was doing superpowers. This was like one of my touchstones I was thinking of for it, and like I did work the Brainiac spaceship into it and stuff. There's a line here that on this rereading kind of jumped out at me in a different way, because it's like, with Twilight, other heroes begin arriving outside the barrier. Those that were his friends, those that were almost his rivals, and that's pointing to, you know, Shazam or Captain Marvel or whoever, you know, like a literal, you know, business rival, you know, in the 50s. And then it's like those that might have been his lovers, it didn't matter. None of them could penetrate it. And so that one's right next to Wonder Woman. So it's like, oh yeah, because like, you know, Alan Moore would always, in his Superman stories, he'd play this thing of like, oh, should Superman and Wonder Woman hook up? You know. But then I'm also thinking like where it's placed. It's like, oh, it could also be referring to Batman. That like, oh yeah, maybe Superman and Batman could have been lovers or something.
Like a couple.
Yeah, and that, like, that has been played out too. You know, there's the Midnighter and Apollo, who are sort of this like alternate universe version of Batman and Superman, and they're a couple.
I don't know. So, like, there's like basically everybody in there. I don't know, like,
right, exactly. Like I knew Shazam / Captain Marvel. I knew Robin. I knew Batman. I knew Wonder Woman. I didn't know these. I didn't know Vartox or Superwoman. Like I learned about them later.
I was getting sad too because like it's pulled back and you see Batman and Robin like they're just using the little like Billy clubs. They're desperately trying. And I was choking me up.
Well, and that's another thing. Like Alan Moore got Curt Swan to draw it, and Curt Swan is like the quintessential Superman artist. Like he's drawn Superman more than anybody, and it's like that was the perfect. He wasn't like, oh, get me like Dave Gibbons or get me like whoever the hot artist of the moment is. He wanted like because he wants this to read as the real and true finale to all those Superman stories you've been reading your entire life. So he gets like the real guy to draw it, and then George Perez inks I think the first issue. And then I don't know if George Perez inks this. No, Kurt Scheffenberger inks the second one. But it's like you get Curt Swan, you get the real guy to like draw it. So it's very credible. Like this looks like a Superman comic, warts and all. And then
she breaks
his neck. Yeah, it's really great. So then he becomes this like zombie.
That's so amazing.
Luthor, yeah, really cool stuff. Yeah, we get Martian Manhunter and Green Arrow and Hawkman showing up, and then Krypto killing the Kryptonite. And again, I didn't know the Kryptonite Man was, but it's like I get it. He's the Kryptonite Man, and he's kind of dopey, and they're like, oh, we'll use him as an assassination weapon, and then Krypto kills him, and it's like, yeah, Superman could never kill, but Krypto's an animal, so he's gonna kill to like defend his.
They use the dopey, get in there.
Yeah, like because Krypto the super dog, that's like the first thing they got rid of when they rebooted Superman. Okay. They got rid of him because he's so corny or whatever. But like this is his final moment. He goes down as a badass.
It's one of the most heroic moments in the whole thing. Oh my god! And
scary too.
He's like the rigor mortis defeats him.
Yeah, and then poof, the villain. Spoiler alert. But the villain is Mixelplick. And this is like, there's this book called Super Folks, written by, I think the guy's name, written by Robert Mayer. And, Alan Moore is like a huge fan of this book and has sort of taken inspiration from it for like a lot of his early superhero stuff. And this is like a plot point straight out of that. Like he has this character called Pixie Syzygy, who's kind of like a like a Mixelplick stand-in, and this whole thing of like him being the villain and him sort of starting out as this like saintly and benign figure, and then becoming mischievous, and then now escalating to like all out and out evil. That's like straight out of Robert Mayer's book, and it is a really cool end. Like it's super smart to be like, hey, instead of using it in the Robert Mayer's book Super Folks was sort of like it was like a spoof.
Yeah.
And so the Superman character is from the planet Kronk, and instead of kryptonite, it was Cronkite. So it's like that kind of stuff. But like Alan Moore's like, hey, why don't I just use the actual characters?
He's like Crunk Juice.
Right. Yeah.
I like how Mixelplick said he spent each vibe he spent 2,000 years on.
Yeah. Very cool. Very well thought out, and the gold kryptonite. Like gold kryptonite takes away Superman's powers forever.
I didn't know. I
mean, that was some lore I knew as a kid. So like again, I knew enough to like for this stuff to like be a very satisfying payoff, as a kid.
He closes the door and says like it's just the bathroom.
Yeah, right. Like I mean, as a kid, I didn't have like a big comic collection or anything. Like I had a handful of comics that I read again and again, and then I kept getting that Superman thing out of the library again and again. So it kind of
mine was the Hulk.
The Hulk. Okay, they had that at your library, and then so they have this bookend of like, she's doing this interview for like some anniversary of Superman's death, and it's like every 10 years they come out to interview her, and she's got this husband, and then it's like, all the. Like, I mean, they make it pretty clear that her husband's Superman, but they never, like, come out and say it, so even that is, like, enough, there's enough room for, like, I just love the, just every bit of this is,
well
perfection.
Thought out.
Yeah.
And the baby crushes the coal, lump of coal.
Turns it into a diamond, which, again, these, like, Alan Moore has done a number of, like, he did, like, a couple Superman stories, this, and then like one other that I know of. Maybe oh yeah, there's a couple. There's like a Swamp Thing meets Superman. So he's done like a handful of them, and then he did a comic in the late '90s called Supreme, where it was like this Superman stand-in, but then he gets to tell all his it's like he gets to tell some more Superman stories there. And then he created a character called Tom Strong, where he got to do some more like Superman kind of stuff. So it's like, you know, he's had this ongoing relationship with the Superman character, and it's like, it's so great that he got to do like the actual, like it's so rare that somebody gets, like he's doing super cool stuff, but with the actual legit real stuff. And I mean, as great as it is to like kind of create your own characters and do this and that, there is a high that you get from like working with the genuine article, you know?
Dude, this is like I'm obsessed with this. Thank you for introducing
this. Oh, sure.
This
yeah, I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, this is like, it's like a gift to humanity. Like, aren't you glad to have some kind of closure with Superman? Because like you don't get it anywhere else.
No, this is it. I was getting choked up, like you mentioned, multiple places. Like when Crypto passed away, even when Lana was electrocuted, I was like, oh.
Well, because the story, like, if it's the final story, it should get darker. You know, it's like again, like Robin and Marion, or like. You know, the fall of Camelot, you know, Excalibur or whatever. It should get, even if it's like sort of a lighthearted story in its essence, it should get a little darker towards the end.
Yes.
You know? And it definitely does. And yeah, it gets a lot of mileage. There's like all these little bits that kind of, you know, tug at your heartstrings.
And for me, not knowing, you know, having a lot of like time spent with these characters, it was cool to like get a little sampling of all the of everyone.
Like, you know enough about Superman to kind of be, you know, to kind of be plugged into this and glad to have like some closure. But then it can also be a jumping off point where it's like, oh yeah, let me check out, you know, let me check out Metallo and stuff. And again, like if you go back and read the old comics, not a lot of good stuff. Like the Superman comic has a couple bright spots here and there, but it's mostly garbage, mostly horse shit, mostly like fucking horse shit. But it's kind of like after this, and again, I'm not that choked up about the stuff that came after, like the John Byrne run. Like it's like I read a lot of it as a kid, like and it didn't compute to me as a kid that like, oh yeah, Superman used to be this thing and then they rebooted it. I didn't get any of that. It's just like, oh, here's the latest, you know, adventure of Superman or whatever. But like I'm not that choked up about that stuff either. But like you know, you go forward like another decade or so and you start getting like the Superman the Animated Series, and they kind of retool it. Like Metallo is cool in that, you know, and then Grant Morrison does some you know, a thing called a series called All-Star Superman that owes a huge debt to this comic, but yeah, like cool stuff, you know.
Who are these guys again?
Yeah, the Metallos. Yeah.
And then was it
the prankster and the toy man, and those are like the typical, like that's why the Superman comics suck. Is those are like his typical villains. Like, you know, the Fantastic Four have Doctor Doom. You know, Spider-Man has you know, Dr. Octopus and the Scorpion and stuff. And then Superman has a bunch of these like middle-aged guys wearing suits.
Is that Rupert Murdoch?
Yeah, and it's like, right, exactly. It's like, could it be more boring? But then like he finds a way to make them kind of sinister, and you know, like it's like they it's like they took me and made a Superman villain. You know, it's like a guy with glasses and a loud plaid suit and a bow tie. It's like holding a teddy bear. You know?
Superman meets his most dangerous villain yet.
What were they thinking? And again, like when Jack Kirby comes to DC in the 70s and is like, okay, I want to shake up Superman. Here's some ideas I have for Superman. And they're like, whoa, you know, back off, Jack. No. And it's like, really? Like,
really? You know. It's like, you don't want to lose the...
the toy man and the prankster.
He's like, it's like he's fighting an evil version of Winston Churchill.
Exactly. That's Superman's rogues gallery is Les Moonves, Winston Churchill, you know.
Les Moonves.
Andy Rooney. You know, it's like
Charlie Rose.
And like, so yeah, Superman is like, he's like more powerful than any superhero. Like in terms of power, he's basically God. and then it's like, who's he go up against?
Tom Snyder.
Yeah, every one of the guys has a cigar. W.C. Fields, Groucho is one of his villains.
We got the definitive list captured. It's like Superman. Look out, Tom Snyder and Les Moonves.
Like he should be going up against the Terminator, and then it's like, okay, they finally they retool Brainiac into this kind of Terminator. Okay, finally a step in the right direction, and then it's like that gets all brushed aside, and we're back to the green guy in his underwear. It's Rodney Dangerfield. Is one again. But as we're talking about this is actually a pretty good comic idea. Maybe we'll save this one. Then pitch a Superman comic where it's Superman goes up against because
the crustiest oldest.
The classic Superman approach, except we actually have every middle-aged guy with a pot belly goes up against Superman, and it's all those guys we've listed.
Rupert Murdoch.
And it is kind of Rupert Murdoch. It's kind of like a legion of superheroes. Who's the guy who started Virgin?
Oh, Richard Branson.
So Richard Branson,
he's the tech guy. He keeps coming up with
Bill Gates. It's actually getting better and better as we add
this is awesome. This is gonna be great.
So DC, that's the Total Recall show pitch. DC, you have my contact information. Me and Matt, we want to do one of those DC Black Label oversized graphic novel series, but it's gonna be Superman versus we're going back to basics, back to the classic Superman style villains in the tradition of the fearsome funsters, of the prankster and the toy man. We're gonna do it, but it's gonna be like a legion of superheroes from various time periods, but they are all those guys. It's W.C. Fields and
it's a lot of
Rupert
cigar
Murdoch.
action.
Yeah, a lot of cigars, a lot of my chickadee.
Jeff Bezos takes a bunch of steroids, he's been taking testosterone.
Yeah.
So he's hulking out. He's got his head's gigantic.
We'll have everybody from Shark Tank.
Mr. Wonderful.
Mr. Wonderful would be a Superman. That would be he'd be on the cover. You're a kid in a comic book store and you're spinning through the racks and you're looking at all these super cool Marvel comics where they go up against these really cool bad guys, and then it's or Mr. Wonderful. Superman goes up against Mr. Wonderful this month. Which one should I pick?
Superman on Shark Tank. He's all right, sharks.
Okay, DC. That's a separate pitch. Is the DC Black Label of Superman on Shark Tank?
He's all right, sharks. Now here's my deal for you.
There's the guy from Pittsburgh. Who's the guy from Pittsburgh on Shark Tank?
Oh, Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban, and he worked his way out of this, but he used to have a strong Pittsburgh accent on there.
Did.
He so he would say, thank you for your presentation, but for those reasons, I'm out. He doesn't say it anymore. He's figured out not to say I'm out. But
his whole thing is he's can I sell this at the Dallas Mavericks arena or whatever? I can put that in the Dallas Mavericks. And then I think the other guy's Devin. He founded FUBU.
Yeah, Devin. Yeah, and
then there's the QVC connection.
Yes, and then
she'd comment on his underwear or whatever.
Right.
She'd be like, "Oh, looking good in those little bread trucks."
And then something Herkshiber.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about.
But
he was cool shark.
Yeah, he was on Dancing with the Stars, and then married his dancing partner on Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah, he's always I'm the cool. He's the Fonzie of Shark Tank.
Yeah, because he has his much younger wife kind of dress him and stuff, and
she
who was a dancer on Dancing with the Stars.
He says she changes my depends.
So yeah, this is so we're gonna lean into all the stuff that used to drive me crazy about Superman comics. We're gonna lean into it.
He's punching Les Moonves, and he's
because I guess the more of them you get together, if he's just going up against one of them, that's kind of bullshit. But if you get just a landscape of these middle-aged tricksters or whatever, he's.
WC from all the time periods.
Yeah, all the time periods. Yeah, the
Winston
Yeah.
evil Winston
The
Churchill.
Legion of Bad Suits. the Legion of Smelly Cigars.
The Legion of Scotch on the Rocks.
I hate kids. So Matt, I'm just curious, like, what is your, like, what's your relationship to Superman? Like, what, you know, because, like, we've talked about the Hulk, and, like, the Hulk is kind of like your superhero, but, like, what's your Superman thing?
Like, my relationship with Superman is pretty much the movies were first for me. I had Superman comics when I was younger, just like random ones I would buy at like the comic shop. But
did you watch like Superman the animated series?
I watched like the superpowers. They were kind of like on
Superpowers, yeah.
I had the death of Superman
was
right
in
the
the 90s.
deal.
Yeah.
That was
huge. And like that was at a time like there was this moment where I kind of like checked out of comics, and like that's when that happened. So I like kind of heard about it, and like some of my younger cousins were like, you know, waiting in line to get there. But by that point, I was kind of like not interested in any of that stuff anymore. And then like a year or two later, I got like way back into comics. But yeah, so that like that was like a blip I missed. But like I remember like kind of hearing about and being like, oh, okay, Superman's dead. Okay.
I always thought it was cool, like, I don't know why, where a superhero has their costume on under their clothes. I thought that was just an interesting thing where, like, and I thought how that would be uncomfortable, like...
Yeah, and then he gets, when he gets, Clark Kent gets, like, shot up by these little Superman dolls with, like, laser vision, you know, he's got the outfit underneath.
Because when I was little, I had the Superman, like underoos, and then I would have my shirt and be like, dun dun dun, and, like, pretend to, like... I had like there was like a cape that came with it.
Yeah, because Superman, like when I was a kid, Superman was my top superhero. Like
Batman was mine.
Yeah, like Batman
and the Hulk.
Yeah, the Superman was number one for me. Like and still like I mean I've got other favorites, and yeah, Batman is pretty great too. But like it's like when I was a kid, it was
Superman.
All Superman. Like I wanted to be Superman. You know, Spider-Man's great.
Batman's
great, but I like loved Superman, and that's why my disappointment was so huge when I got older and I started. You know, having a little pocket money where I could actually like buy some Superman comics and buy some old ones, and it was like every single one was shit. It was just all and I get like I still get kind of angry thinking about it because I think about like you know like what a kid in like the 60s was going through who was like a Superman fan, and just how like fucked over they were, where it's like they're kind of like forced to start reading Marvel comics because it's like, okay, with Marvel I can get some cool story. Like I want to read a cool Superman story, but they're just not giving it to me. They're giving me like pranks and hoaxes and things. Like I want to read some real shit, you know. And
that's what this is.
Yeah, and this is that. This pays off.
Tom, I think it's the Hulk.
The Hulk.
The Hulk,
of course, I mean, we've had that conversation. The Hulk.
Yeah.
Like the Hulk again. I love the Hulk and stuff, but it's like. Hulk didn't speak to me. Spider-Man didn't speak as much as I love them. Like they didn't speak to me the way Superman did. Like I was just all in on Superman.
Dude, this is one of like, this is an all-timer for me, man. I'm gonna try to track it down in all its forms. I kind of like
the newsprint is the but it took me a while to get the newsprint. Like I had this one, you know, for a while.
And I was on eBay too, checking out the
it goes for a lot now.
Or I didn't check.
Oh,
I didn't check.
You might have missed your window. I mean, maybe you could find it, you know, somewhere.
I was actually looking on eBay for the Rawlings. Poster.
Oh, the ads are so much fun, yeah.
Because it said you get a free poster, and I was like, I wonder if I can get this base. This it's got Daryl Strawberry and Cal Ripken Jr. on it. I didn't check what this is going for.
Yeah. So this is like, so Alan Moore is doing the final story to the Superman that matters, the Superman that everybody's been reading for, you know, the past like I guess it was like 50 years at that point or something. He's doing the ending, but then within this same issue, they're advertising the new Superman, the John Byrne Superman. You know, looks a lot more like Christopher Reeve than than Superman had.
That looks so much like Christopher.
Yeah, and the idea was that they're going to streamline Superman because they feel like Superman has accumulated a lot of baggage, a lot of like Supergirl, Crypto the Wonder Dog, you know, all this kind of stuff that was, you know, viewed as like corny in the 80s. And so they're just going to scrap all that, start from scratch, make it more like the movies, a little more like grounded in reality, and also let a new generation feel like, you know, Superman is theirs, that they're being introduced to Superman, like, you know, one thing at a time. But like Alan Moore with this thing is kind of like showing you like you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You know, there's, you know, so much great stuff in there that's sort of accumulated after all these years, and Alan Moore's like, I'm the guy who, like, you think this stuff's corny, I'm gonna make it as cool as possible, and then he does.
He was who was he? He was joking again.
Julie Schwartz, the editor, and then little by little over the years, all this stuff has been like reinserted back into Super. You know, like it wasn't long before Crypto showed back up again, and now Crypto, like the Super Pets, are like a whole franchise. Like they have movies now of like Crypto the Wonder Dog and Ace the Bat Hound.
Ooh, like,
and look, they have ads. Look at the ads. It's kind of like the end of one era and the beginning of another, because the ads in the corner are who watches the Watchmen. So we get an ad for Watchmen here, and then how will the Dark Knight end? We get an ad for the Dark Knight Returns. So we're seeing, and those are like these titanic, you know, explosive things that completely transform the industry and like the superhero genre and the comic book, you know.
It makes me want to read more Superman, but I was like...
Yeah. Well, I mean, the next thing to read after that, well, you know, track down the other Alan Moore Superman stories. So you got Superman meets Swamp Thing.
Oh, hell yeah.
And then you have this one where it's like, for the man who has everything, it's Superman's birthday, and everybody's showing up with birthday gifts for Superman. Super cool story. And then after you've like exhausted the Alan Moore Superman stuff, you can read Alan Moore's Supreme Comics, and you can also check out Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman.
Oh, nice.
That's kind of like that's one of All-Star Superman is one of those like standing on the shoulders of giants. Like Grant Morrison made like a 12-part series that like uses this as its foundation and then creates something just incredible out of it. Like one of my all-time favorite series is All-Star Superman.
Hell yeah! Like I got a lot of a reading, a nice Superman syllabus.
Yeah, and maybe like they've adapted a lot of Superman comics into like those sort of like Superman animated movies and stuff that like end up on like HBO Max and stuff.
I saw a lot of them on there.
And like as far as I know, they've never done this. I mean, this one is more. They've done the other Alan Moore one they did for The Man Who Has Everything. They did an adaptation of that. They need to do this, you know.
Yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. I'm interested in your take because this is like, I'm a comics guy. I talk to other comics guys about this stuff, but I am kind of curious what, you know.
I'm a first timer for this.
Yeah.
And thanks for hosting a comic school here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is
so
this will be an ongoing. This is like a lot. There's like sort of podcasts and things like this where it's like, oh, I'm gonna introduce somebody to like Star Wars who's never seen it or things like that, and they always have these like very insulting titles, like making the person like out to be like a fucking idiot who like their teeth, you know, and it's like, so we got to come up with like a real like humiliating like we're like, you know, Matt is Matt is reading comics.
The Rube reads,
right? Exactly. Yeah.
Reading Rube.
Yeah.
Reading Rubo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Complete Idiot's Guide to Comics, starring Matt.
Comics for an idiot?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Comics for a fucking idiot.
Matt, you've graduated to you're finally like at a comics reading level. You know? But yeah, we need to come up with some kind of title. But yeah, like comic school or something like. Teaching Matt to read comics.
I'm like, joke's on you. I'm like, I can't read.
You got the last laugh.
I signed my name with just a mark. Like,
yeah, just like you draw an X with your feces. The thumbnail, like the drawing, is like you sitting on the toilet reading like a comic with like a big dunce cap on. You got your tongue sticking out. It's called Matt Like Comics.
It's like I got two brain cells. It's
me read comics. This was a lot of fun.
Shit,
I'm really glad we did this. And we'll
keep this series
yeah,
going?
we'll figure out something to do as a follow-up. I'm Tom Scioli, author of I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee. And in the show notes below, you'll find a pre-order link where you can pre-order I Am Stan, as well as pre-ordering at that same link the softcover edition of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics.
I'm Matt Zeoli.
And please follow me on Twitter at Tom Scioli and on Instagram at Tom_Scioli.
Follow me on Instagram at cinema_tune.
You can support my Patreon. Go to patreon.com, search Tom Scioli. And if you sign up for the Patreon, you'll have access to the full archive as well as new art and comics as I post them.
Follow the show on Instagram at total_recall_show.
And we'll see you next time for Matt Read Comics and like the R's backwards and you know.
I'm on the toilet, but I'm like, I haven't done skip. I'm like,
yeah, with your tongue sticking out.
I'm like this.
Yeah.
I'm like,
you're holding it upside down. But yeah, like that's there's like a new thing, like Tom Sharpling on his. Like it's exclusive to Patreon. Like we're giving you this stuff for free, but he has like an exclusive Patreon called Make Mike Marvel, where he has like his like producer Mike, you know, hates comics, hates superheroes, hates all the Marvel stuff. So they're making him watch all the Marvel movies. Like,
that's
starting
a good
with like Iron Man and stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So this is like our equivalent to that.
Thanks for showing me the ropes.
Sure.
I didn't take these on the shit.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, I would know if you did. Like, it would be very obvious. There'd be like lines coming off of it.
They're stink lines. They're little like the flies in the circle with the two lines. I love a good stink line.
Yes.
But there's key pages missing because I ran out of TV.